Welcome inside the Mr. Smalls Theater studio. Yes, a studio here in Millvale for this edition of Gike's Got Game. Very proud to be with you for a new era in the River's Edge. Brian Crawford alongside, engineering the show. We'll get that Facebook Live video up and running for you in a bit. But as for right now, audio only, old school radio here on the River's Edge. And I am Matt Gike. I am a reporter and analyst, chiefly, for DKPittsburghSports.com, in addition to being into my third year as a host on this very internet radio station. Proud to start that third year. It has been a joy. Always one of the highlights of my week, as I tell Brian every time I come in, whether it was down the road at the Millvale Studios or now up here on top of the hill, our little perch at Mr. Smalls Theater, atop Mr. Smalls Theater, this historic venue in the history of Pittsburgh entertainment. Later on in today's program, I'll get you some advice and some tips if you're like me and you're not happy with your performance in your summer rec league. Played some deck hockey last night, and I'm still not satisfied. So I'm going to call in the cavalry. Mark Gike, my brother, from out in the state of Washington, where he continues his trip around the country, serving folks in the physical therapy area, although he is also a certified strength and conditioning specialist and an athletic trainer certified. So he's got all your tips on how to dominate, or just at least how to get better when you're playing against your fellow competitors throughout the summer or into the fall and the winter if you're a rec hockey player like I am as well. And I'm talking about ice hockey in addition to deck hockey. Can't get enough playing out in Penn Hills last night. Thanks to my good friend Alan Saunders for inviting me to be part of his team, and maybe someday I'll contribute something offensively. Also on the show, my Ban the Cliche attacks something that really should have been dead a few years ago, but the so-called mainstream media continues to hammer this. Am I part of the mainstream? I don't know. I don't think I am, but I could be a little bit closer to that than what I used to be, which was someone writing from home, someone who was a blogger, and that gives you a hint as to what the cliche I'll be banning is. And we'll have the final number to wrap up the program, in addition to my prescription for what ails the Pirates, and the hat I'm wearing right now gives you an idea on that. Since there's no video, I'll tell you it is an Oakland A's road cap sporting the Oakland green. And I think Neil Huntington could afford to emulate the man who's made his career as a general manager out on the east side of the bay for more than a decade. But for today's opening statement here on Gike's Got Game, now every Friday at 10 a.m., I would like to dispel a myth. And that myth is that July is the slowest month on the sports calendar. Yes, there are only Major League Baseball games on the schedule for the month of July. If you're talking about the four major professional sports, if you're talking about Major League Soccer here in North America, well, then there are two sports in action. But all things considered, this is the slowest month if you are interested in real action on the field or the ice or the court. But I would contend that in this modern era, and in particular for someone like myself who works online and is looking for clicks and trying to generate enthusiasm and engagement with the website or sites that I work for, this is a rather fruitful time of the year. It's not quite harvest time, literally, but it is for many of us in the sports content, #content business. And I say this because of not just one thing, but there was a particular moment that occurred this past week that got me thinking. My most read story in 2 years at DKPittsburghSports.com wasn't coverage from the Stanley Cup playoffs or the final in Nashville last month. It wasn't from the wild card game against the Cubs at PNC Park nearly 2 years ago. It wasn't anything at all related to the Pittsburgh Steelers. Still, I would say the king of all Pittsburgh sports teams, even though the Penguins are gaining on them. But nothing that I wrote about the Steelers generated as much as something that I wrote last week. And no, it wasn't anything from the Riverhounds welcoming DC United to Highmark Stadium. I had to throw that in there just to give a shout out to the local soccer club. No, the most read story that I produced in 2 years at DKPS was a speculative, analytical story. It wasn't just me spitballing, but it was a story on the possibility of Jordan Staal returning to Pittsburgh. If the Penguins were interested in hunting big game, if Jim Rutherford is trying to reel in a big fish, to use another outdoorsy metaphor, I think he could do no better than Jordan Staal, the former Penguin, who has now spent 4 years with the Carolina Hurricanes and has not played in a single playoff game since then. In fact, since he left town, it'll be 5 years, or it was 5 years, at the NHL draft last month. Staal moved on. The Penguins got Brandon Sutter and Brian Dumoulin and the draft pick that led to the selection of Derek Pouliot. So I suppose 1 out of 3 isn't bad, and Dumoulin looks like he's going to be a long-term member of the Penguins if he and the team can work out a new contract. He's a restricted free agent this summer. But the team hasn't had that 3-center depth since Jordan Staal left, and I think if you look at Jordan Staal's numbers over the past 5 or 4 years in Carolina, you could be convinced into thinking that he's in decline. But if you look at his underlying metrics, the puck possession numbers that I love to turn to so much, and so many in the hockey community are looking to more and more often to gauge effectiveness, because goals are rare in the NHL, so you have to look to something else to give you a baseline of performance. Staal has been as good as almost anybody in the league, short of your very top echelon players. So to bring him in, even if he does have 6 years left at $6 million apiece on that long-term contract he's under, would be a real win for the Penguins, I think, if they could do that. So I laid out that argument on DKPittsburghSports.com on Wednesday, coming off of the 4th of July holiday. And man, did it clean up in terms of clicks. And as a subscription-based website, we're not looking necessarily for clicks to gauge success, but yeah, we'd rather have more than not. And the story that I wrote, as of right now, has 20,200 visits. And that may not seem like a lot for maybe the Deadspins or the ESPNs of the world, but for us, based in the Pittsburgh market, as a subscription-based website, and we have nearly 40,000 equivalent subscriptions, that's a pretty large number. And as I said, it's the biggest thing I've written. It's the thing that I've written that's gotten the most impressions on our website in 2+ years, as I joined the site as a freelancer about 26 months ago. So that tells me something. And it tells me, for one thing, maybe it depresses me a bit because we spend all this money on travel and trying to get you to places, and I spend time and effort to get to the arenas or to Cranberry Township to cover Penguins practice or development camp, or I've traveled all over this continent for Pirates games, and nothing created the kind of interest that this story that I just wrote sitting in my living room and my kitchen at times generated for our site. So it tells me that it's not just simply a lack of news at this time of the year. It's not just the afterglow of a second straight Stanley Cup, although those things do help. It's not just simple nostalgia for one of the original characters in the Pens' current era of contention and championship success. I see a greater phenomenon at play here. When it comes to sports interest, the offseason, in whatever sport you're talking about, gets people engaged and excited just as much as the actual games these days. And part of it makes sense. Think about it. If you support a bad team, the end of the season or even the beginning of the season, and especially the playoffs, aren't very cool for you. You're watching with a vicarious eye if you are a fan of a team that is not in contention, doesn't have a chance to even challenge or sniff a championship. But the offseason and the draft as well is the chance you have to hang with the big boys. You're on a level playing field finally because there are no standings. They're wiped clean and everything starts anew. We talk about that every spring when it pertains to baseball and hope springing eternal in either Arizona or Florida. But in this case, the offseason functions as a similar thing. You have the hot stove in baseball. I'm not sure what we'd call it in hockey, perhaps the beer garden, as you retreat to a cooler environment and kick back. And, well, if you're like me, you have your phone on you. You can follow the news from wherever you are. So the hockey beer garden in the summer is often a place bustling with activity. And your team isn't left out, no matter whether you finish first or 30th in the 2016-17 NHL regular season. Even if your team was left out of the playoffs or they were eliminated early, or in the case of the Nashville Predators, you're trying to eliminate that sinking feeling that occurred at the very end when the Penguins defeated your team in Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Final to win their second consecutive Stanley Cup. So there's a democratizing aspect of the offseason that I think has only been bolstered by the proliferation of the internet and having these multiple media sources, not just your traditional ones who were stuck to, by their own doing, but they were stuck to reporting traditional stories, not speculation, like I posted about Jordan Staal and why he would fit, posting the arguments in favor and the arguments against, to be clear. But as I mentioned, I think he would be the best fit for the Pens if they don't mind making a serious financial and time commitment to the contract under which Jordan Staal is performing. So in the past, that wasn't something that a media source like ours that covers the games, that is there, that has a press credential, would have done. Also, though, I think nearly every fan has played general manager, so to speak, on a fantasy team at this point. And with sites like capfriendly.com, which is completely special, the successor to Cap Geek, but Cap Friendly has taken it to a whole new level. Visit that if you haven't and you're a hockey fan. And there are equivalent sites for baseball and basketball and football and soccer. But it's never been easier to imagine yourself in a GM chair and wonder, how would I go about fitting all these players under a salary cap? Not really a concern in baseball, so that's not so much of a thing, but it's added an artificial limit and it's added intrigue to have salary caps in 3 out of our 4 major North American professional sports. So you have these resources, and it's a challenge. It's a psychological thing. And even if some of us couldn't play these sports, we can imagine ourselves running teams rather easily. And that goes for us in the media as well as all the fans sitting at home. Oh, and also, never underestimate the number of people who are bored at work this time of year or any time of year, but it does come into play more in the summer. People are out on vacation, you're tooling around the internet, and anything to get you dreaming or speculating or even disputing what someone like myself has just put out there is a good way to kill some time and to keep your mind engaged. Stir the pot. That's what I have always said. And even though at times I've shied away from the type of speculation or fake trades, if you will, that some people will put forward and some fans are obsessed with, I think if you can make an argument, what's the harm in making a case for something without having any kind of actual reporting? So you can supplement your reporting with this type of work too, and that's why I enjoy the role I have at DK Pittsburgh Sports, and that's why I enjoy the modern media landscape as much as I do. And I can tell from the clicks that I see that you enjoy this type of thing as well. And as the Penguins try to reload to try to make a run at a 3rd consecutive Stanley Cup, I can't imagine that type of interest is going to be going away anytime soon, even as the free agent activity and the trade talks cool down a bit as we head toward the back end of July. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge. Let me know what you think. You can find me on Facebook at Gajtka Sports Media. You can spell my last name Gajtka, and find me at Matt Gajtka on Twitter as well. When I return, we'll shift over to baseball, but keep the focus on the so-called silly season. What can the Pirates do in terms of asset management to make this a longer, more fruitful decade of Pirates baseball? This is Matt Gajtka, and this is Gike's Got Game from Mr. Small's Theater here on the River's Edge. Use it, we'll lose it, baby, yeah. Welcome back inside the, I almost said Millvale Studios, our former home. I don't want to forget our former home, Brian. They were so good to us.
Yeah, you know what? We went from 2 podcasts to 9 there, so it was a good place
Exactly.
for us.
Yeah, a place of growth for the River's Edge. I was there for almost exactly 2 years. I think I was just short of it in terms of doing this show. And I do miss certain aspects of it, but I think this will be huge.
Oh, the space is amazing
for our network. Yeah.
I love
to have the studio space, and as you were saying, some improvements coming up. I know that you and Sarah Kramer are hard at work on getting those going.
One of the great things about this space as well is this courtyard that we're overlooking here. It's a really special spot for the music scene. Yeah, right ahead of us. This building overlooks the courtyard at Mr. Small's, and a lot of great, amazing conversations happened there, and a lot of this network was built in that courtyard.
So here we are, up on top of the hill, and I'm loving it. This is a lot of fun, and it's, like I said, it's been an interesting 2 years to be part of an internet radio station. That's something that is new to me, I think new to a lot of people, but here we are, and our audio stream continues on riversedgepgh.com. And you also have the Metal Edge revved up, too.
It's on its way.
Yeah, so that'll be coming soon. And if you like the local music that you hear during these segments or playing for most of the day here on the station, but with a little bit more of an edge, no pun intended, then I think you'll be into the metal edge. And speaking of metal, I was very upset to see that System of a Down will not be making an album anytime soon.
Oh.
So I'm not a huge metal guy, Brian, but there are certain bands that are more in the mainstream of the metal genre that I really get into.
Do you have a specific type of metal genre that you like? Because that's the thing about metal is I feel like that's the worst classification, because within metal there are so many unique genres just within metal, and some of them do not sound anything alike.
Boy, I don't even know enough about metal to say which genre I like. That's embarrassing. See, I'm not a terribly savvy music consumer, and I know what I like. I also like to listen to crappy pop music too, so blame me, I suppose, for all those stations.
That's why you look at the River's Edge network, and it's a mixture of different genres, because I kind of fall into that same trap where I like so many different things. So.
Yeah, you go through my CD case, and I still do have a CD case in addition to my iTunes, which I just busted out the old case in my car the other day for a throwback. But the variety is there. I've always been like that. Everything but country. So if you start a country station here, Brian, I will not be listening to it.
The other day, oh my goodness, this is funny. I have this floppy, and it's green, so you can't see it if you're watching the video later.
You can see right through it.
Yeah, you can see right through it. There's a thing I'm waving here. But anyways, the intern, I went to tell him to put something on a floppy drive the other day, and handed him this invisible
That
USB.
is not a floppy,
No,
sir.
it's not. Yes, I realized that it mid-sentence, but I'm like, oh, floppy. That's a blast from the past. You mentioned CDs, and there you go.
I don't remember the literal floppy disk. That's a little bit before my time. I'm 32 years old. So when I was in grade school, there were a few of those lying around, but we didn't really use them. We used the 3.5-inch disc. We still called them floppies, even though they weren't. And
they weren't floppy at all. They were super rigid.
They were rigid, yes.
Yeah.
And you could beat your friends over the head with them if you wanted to. That was quite the era, playing Oregon Trail on the PC in the back of the classroom after we were done with our schoolwork.
Yeah.
A lot of learning was done there. So that's Brian Crawford. I'd like to bring him in. And sometimes it's about sports, sometimes it's not. But he's the man over my shoulder, and he's the host of River Talk here on this very network. Well, I mentioned in the opening segment, folks, and by the way, this is Gike's Got Game, a new kind of sports talk, or at least I like to make it so. The silly season, if you will, in hockey and basketball. Boy, I don't follow the NBA, but it seems like the NBA generates so many headlines, more so in the offseason than in the regular season. And hockey is a bit of a junior model of that, but that's what we know here in town. That's what I know, more pertinently, much more than I know basketball. But in the summer, for both of those winter sports that go deep into the springtime, there has been a rejuvenation of interest, and I think even hockey could play it up more than it does. You could, for instance, take free agency away from that 4th of July weekend, make it the second weekend of July. I know that would cut into more people's off seasons, but I'm just saying, if you're looking to make everything an event like the NBA does very well with its draft lottery, the NHL attaches that to a game broadcast. I think it should be separate of that too. Whatever it takes to get people thinking about and talking about, or typing about, as it were, on social media, your sport, I think you should go for that. Baseball needs no help in the month of July, though. And I said it's the only sport of the 4 major pro leagues in North America that is in literal action in July, which is a slow month for everybody else in that way. But July, especially in the run-up to the non-waiver trade deadline, which I believe is back on July 31st. It was August 1st last year. I should probably know that, but at any rate, it's about 3 weeks away. And that trade season, trade rumor season, trade report season is upon us once again in baseball. And as it pertains to the local ball club, I know the Pirates have won 3 games in a row, taking 3 of 4 from the sad sack Phillies at Citizens Bank Park this week. They head into Wrigley to wrap up the unofficial first half of the season this weekend. The struggling Cubs may be vulnerable, but the Pirates, despite that winning streak, remain below 500, remain 7 games out of first place in the National League Central, remain, I believe it's 9 games out in the wild card as we head into Friday afternoon's action at Wrigley. So let's be real. They're not in contention, even if the division is crap, even if, say, the Rockies are falling back to the pack, leading the National League wild card hunt. This team is not, as currently constituted, a playoff caliber team. So Unlike last year when I felt Neil Huntington treaded water, yes, he picked up Ivan Nova, but also he traded his best relief pitcher for a guy in Felipe Rivero who, while very good, was more of a forward-looking piece than someone who was going to help them in 2016. So all things considered, those trades worked out very well, but here we are still in 2017, some of it through no fault of Huntington, with Marte out and with Gong out, but here we are more than midway through the season, and they are 7 games out of the nearest playoff spot available to them. So I'm not saying blow it up, but Neil Huntington needs to take after the guy who sports the cap I'm wearing today, the Oakland A's, Billy Beane. I know he hasn't won a World Series. The A's haven't been to the playoffs, haven't been to a division series in several years. Yes, they made the wild card round in 2014, the last time they really, quote-unquote, went for it in trading for Yoenis Cespedes. Or trading Yoenis Cespedes to get John Lester, I should say. But they made a big trade there. The one thing I will say about Billy Beane, he doesn't go halfway into the pool. He doesn't just stick his toe into the water like we've seen Neil Huntington do in past years, picking up relief pitchers, for instance, at the trade deadline. Players that have helped, but not someone or not people who put them over the top or made them into the favorites in the National League, like there was an opportunity to do so in 2014 and in 2015. That hasn't happened for Neil Huntington. And for the most part, it's allowed him to keep the team in at least quasi-contention for the past 5 years. Last year at this time, they were kind of in it after a bad June, but you could argue that they were still in a position to do something. And at the end of July, they were just a couple of games out of the wild card position, the second wild card position in the National League. But this year, I hope, and I would hope if I'm a Pirates fan, that this convinces Huntington that assets, and I hate to refer to humans as assets, but that's what they are when we're talking about this sort of thing. But assets like Andrew McCutchen, like Josh Harrison going to his second All-Star game with a real rebound season. I give credit to him. Speaking of rebounds, Andrew McCutchen looked like he was almost all the way back, if not all the way back, with a torrid June that gave him the National League Player of the Month honors after nearly 2 years of slumping and a really scary bad 2016 at times and early 2017. McCutchen looks like he still might be a viable, at least offensive player into his early 30s. So if you're Neil Huntington, you have to get the most of these types of situations. And if this team's not going to compete this year, which I just said it isn't, you may disagree with me, but I think it's rather indisputable at this point. When you're 7 out with 70-some games to go, it's time to restructure and think about 2018 and beyond. So go full Billy Beane, Neil Huntington. See what you can get for Andrew McCutchen, who has a very affordable team-triggered option for next year. I believe it's $18 million or somewhere in that range. Sounds like a lot. It would be a ton of money in hockey, but in baseball, it's really not for a player who is hitting like McCutchen is. So take advantage of his value being on the upswing. Take advantage of Josh Harrison looking like he is once again a legitimate starting player and a valuable starting player for a team that has aspirations of making the playoffs. He can move around the diamond. Those super utility types are very in right now in baseball. See if you can get a taker on him. You saw what Ben Zobrist got when he went to the Royals a couple of years ago and helped them win a World Series, in fact, in 2015. So there are opportunities here. I'm not saying trade Garrett Cole, but see what's out there for 3+ years of control of a pitcher that still, I think many in baseball believe, could have ace potential. It takes pitchers longer sometimes. It looks like that's going to be the case for Garrett Cole, even as he works his way into his 4th full Major League season. So that puts it all in perspective. He's been a disappointment, but maybe there's a way to make him into something positive for the Pirates. And he is very affordable for the next couple of seasons as he is still in salary arbitration. So think outside the box. Think bold. You see those Tecate beer commercials, rather cringe-inducing with Sylvester Stallone. But he says, be bold. That's what I keep thinking about when I consider what Neil Huntington should be doing this July. If I had one complaint about Neil's leadership of the baseball operations department for nearly a decade, it's that he rarely makes a bold move. The Jason Bay trade way back when would have qualified, but that was a no-brainer. The Pirates were well out of it. This is the real situation where a GM makes his money. When you make the tough call, not when you're 30 games out like the 2008 Pirates were. It's when you're 7 games out and your attendance is down, and you're worried about losing the attention of the casual fans if you haven't already done that, I say make the unpopular move. And easy for me to say sitting here, my job isn't on the line if it goes wrong, but if you're going to do business the way the Pirates are trying to do so, and no matter what you may think about Bob Nutting, this is the way they're doing it, so I choose to think of it in this framework. If you're trying to win on a budget, on a shoestring, you can't do it via a series of tinkers. You have to take some chances. That may lead to the GM being out of a job in a couple of years, but if attendance is down, and it looks like it's going to be down by a couple of thousand at least for the second consecutive season, then either you have to go all in and spend past your means, or you have to tear part of it down and refresh. And I think the Pirates youngsters have shown enough this year. Your Jose Osunas, your Adam Frazier's. You look to the pitching side of it. Jameson Taillon, getting past his testicular cancer, still appears to be the real deal. Even bottom of the rotation guys like Trevor Williams or Chad Kuhl are starting to show some progress. So I think there's real promise there. And if you can get Gregory Polanco back on track, if you get Starling Marte back into the lineup, and if you can find a way to get Jung Ho Gung back for 2018, I still think this can be a contending team, or at least one that can make things interesting into the near future. Maybe the Cubs' pitching problems persist despite their sizable war chest. So there could be an opening, but I don't see it being this year. So it behooves Neil Huntington. I think it's his job and his duty to get what he can out of Andrew McCutchen, out of perhaps Josh Harrison, maybe even look into Francisco Cervelli with Elias Diaz showing some signs of life. That one's a bit of an outside-the-box thought, but just putting it out there. Nothing should be outside the box for Neil Huntington this month. He has 3 weeks to think about it. And again, you can make trades in August too, but strike while the getting is good. And I say strike before the deadline. I would make the decision now, try to make something happen over the All-Star break, and shift into a new era of Pirates baseball. Nothing against Andrew McCutchen, but I think he's worth more off the Pirates than he is on the Pirates at this point. This team and this baseball market needs a rejuvenation, and this is the month to do it, in my view. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge, live from Mr. Small's Theater here in Millvale. I'm Matt Gajtka. When I come back from this break, my brother Mark will join me, certified strength and conditioning specialist, also athletic trainer, and physical therapist to the stars. We'll shift some gears and talk about how to dominate your summer rec league. I know that's something I'm very concerned about, so consider me a proxy for you if you're into performance and you're not a professional or even a high-level amateur, but you just want to get better. How can you go about doing that? I'm going to talk to my brother Mark about that. I can think of no other person that I'd rather talk to about that than him. He'll be with me on the other side of this break on Gike's Got Game. Back for segment 3 of Gike's Got Game on this July 7th, 7/7/17. Just realized that. Thank you for listening or watching. We have the video version available on archive today, Facebook Live. Not being so kind on this Friday morning, late to wake up. You know who's someone who's not late to wake up, though? And how about that segue? It's my brother Mark Gajtka, certified athletic trainer, strength and conditioning specialist, and doctor of physical therapy. Currently living out in Washington State. He is awake bright and early on this Friday. On his way to work, he agreed to join me for some tips on how to get better or at least get into reasonable shape to perform in your summer rec sports league, whether for me it's deck or roller hockey. For you, it might be basketball or baseball or softball. Anything at all is on the table here, and we're going to shift away from pro sports and high-level stuff. We're just talking about the average Joe and Jane in this case, Mark. So thanks for joining us and giving us an opportunity to address the common folk here.
Even if it involves during my drive, makes it go a little quicker.
You're on your truck Bluetooth or something like that, so this is very high-tech, from what I understand.
Very high tech.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Yeah.
So
we're not saving any pennies here.
I laid out your credentials. You've been on this show before, and we've always talked about injuries at the pro level and advanced versions of training. I remember that discussion from last summer too. But what about for someone who is either just getting into it or just trying to get off their butt and get off the couch and do something active this summer? This is the best time to do it, whether you're trying to lose weight or get into shape for a league. And the latter thing is what I want to talk about. So if you had to lay out a training plan, a generic training plan for someone who, for instance, let's start with a person who, like I said, is going from the couch to a rec league. What's the best way to go about it without hurting themselves?
Yeah, sure. I mean, this is a great topic. I'm glad you brought it up. I was pretty excited when you sent me the text this morning because, this is something that a lot of people are going to be dealing with, and I see it, especially with, friends of our age that are starting to get into their 30s, and when these are the type of things when injuries happen, when people just want to jump in and do something. So this is a big deal that you just have to prepare your body. If we're going to talk very generically here, because you obviously need a very specific type of plan based off of what sports you're going to play, how often you're going to play, your previous experience with it, your skill level, for example, and things of that nature. So there's a lot of different variables that you need to consider when can I just jump into something or do I need more preparation for it? But for just the average Joe or Jane, this is a big thing where you need to start doing something before these seasons really start kicking off. You need to prepare your body for at least even a somewhat of a step higher in activity level than what you were doing previously. So, for example, if somebody just went to work, they have a desk job, and then their leisure activities involve what most people like to do, which is electronics, and that's even less movement. And all you're doing is getting, just basic day-to-day things done, like getting bathed and dressed and eating. Jumping into a sport is a huge leap, believe it or not. If that's
I believe it. I've experienced it.
Modern science here. I'm not breaking any scientific barrier with this knowledge that's going to be put out there, but I think people don't realize how sedentary they've become based off of new leisure and what jobs are now doing. And this is a big epidemic, not only within, and this is my plug for the PT world, is how many problems I see because of lack of movement, not because of movement. So, there is going to be this idea of graded exposure for these people to get back into it. And even if it's something simple to start with in the wintertime, if you want to take advantage of the New Year's resolution and take it on and get to the gym and do at least a couple things, at least once or twice a week even, your tissue is going to be way better prepared for even lower level activity or even some of the higher level stuff that we might be talking about. And, they could prevent a lot of problems in the future. So it really is getting some graded exposure, even just getting there. If running is the primary mode or jogging is a primary mode in your sport, i.e. basketball, soccer, then that's something you might want to start doing earlier on and doing it slowly. It's all about letting the tissue adapt to, the activity again, the sport again. So that's a big concept that's, it can span all different phases of skill level or, things of that nature, different populations. So that's nothing new to anybody. But yeah, that is, you can't just jump straight into things, man, if that kind of makes sense. So that's kind of the beginning here. What might be the beginning of the generic plan is get used to movement again.
Now, say you're already in that spot. Say you're someone like me who likes to work out quite a bit. How much do you want to range into sport-specific training? And where do you go what do you turn to? What sort of activities do you want to turn to just generally build more athleticism?
Yeah, another good spot. And this is, I ask my patients every single day, what's your goal? That's the biggest thing. If somebody wants to get faster, are they going to care that you're working on things that make them more flexible or more mobile? Probably not, unless you sell it the correct way, which, sometimes people are successful and sometimes they're not. So it's what is the goal, number one? So let's just play, for example, like you said, you are somebody who plays maybe at least a game a week. And in the meantime, you want to get better so that one game that you play a week for the rec sport, you want to show off a little bit, or you want to try to get a leg up on people,
Yep.
that sort of thing.
That's where I am right now.
Yeah, and that's where you need to continue with your basic program that you're doing with the workout, staying in shape. That's a good portion. From there, you really need to again look at your specific activity. So I'm assuming we're referring to hockey in this case.
Sure. Hockey, golf, tennis, all three.
Hockey, golf, tennis.
Yeah.
Okay, so
The big three, as I call them.
sure, you break as we do in our household as well. I would put soccer in there
Soccer,
somewhere.
yeah,
but,
you got to fit. The big four, yes.
Those are my big four. Yeah, so, if you break those down, you're looking at, you need to start prepping your body for better rotation. And so that would be one thing that we would look at with designing a program is, is your rotation available? Are you getting it from the right spots? Or, is the strength in that rotation available? Is it explosive enough? That type of idea. That would be one thing that I would look at for sure. A second part is, preparing the legs for that activity as well. So for hockey, maybe more so, but you're going to have to train in a certain pattern that you're going to be using those muscles a lot so that they're ready to take on, 60 plus minutes of movement in a rec league because, you're probably not getting much time off the ice or off the court as other people might.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, that's another thing that you'll look at too. And then based off of that new activity that you're doing more often, what you'll want to start to look at too is, okay, I'm not a young pup anymore, so injuries are more likely. So what do I need to do that's going to, bulletproof me a little bit better? And then that's where your cool down corrective exercise or mobility program becomes a little bit more important. Also, what's going to become something that a staple into your program is adding some of that explosive movements. So a little bit more of the plyometric training, if you've heard of those terms. I'm sure you have through me plenty of times.
Yes.
But essentially what plyometric breaks down to for the listeners at home is it's a way that people become more explosive after a quick stretch of the tissue. So it's a way that they can create a stretch and then contract the muscle very quickly. It's a component of speed and quickness. There's multiple other ones, but it's one. How fast can the actual muscle contract? And that's what you're looking at. So that's another portion that we would like to add into a program. And then it's not just adding these things in, willy-nilly. It's making sure that you get the right dosage. And again, grading it incorrectly. You can't just start off into a high plyometric program. You need to safely do it by having a certain amount of strength in not only double, but maybe a single leg position if we're talking about lower body.
Yes, single leg, very body. Important. Yeah.
Yeah, so you're looking at multiple different facets there. And just for you, or for anyone who's around the caliber of intensity that I know you're at,
very intense.
It's very intense. You're just going to want to be more individual too. You can't just take a generic program and just try to make generic results from it.
Yeah.
So that's, if it becomes more of I'm really interested in this thing, looking to, and here's just another plug, if you're going this route is trying to find somebody who has a background in sports performance. So whether it's a PT that has a little bit more of a background in that, or if it's a strength and conditioning coach or specialist, not just your random run-of-the-mill personal trainer at a gym, but taking somebody who's going to take a look at, how you're moving and where maybe some of your, not necessarily impairments because you're healthy, but for lack of a better term, your weaknesses, if you want to use that. But even then, I don't particularly like that word.
Your less than strengths, your non-strengths.
Yeah, sure, and yeah, your opposite of strength. So yeah, you're taking a look at those things too, and saying, does that matter for my particular sport too? Because sometimes your body is primed, and some certain things are not as strong as others because of the particular movement or particular activity that you're doing. So, it's important to know what is an important weakness or lack of strength, and then what's an important strength or tightness or flexibility to have. So, that's where it becomes a little bit more individualized. But, for the run-of-the-mill people, I think sometimes you can kind of get started with something really slightly generic and grade it in slowly. You can pretty much start anything as long as it's slow enough. Other than these explosive movements, if you haven't done anything for a long time, I would not recommend jumping straight into a plyometric program. That's a lot of force on the body that if it's not strong enough to handle, it's not going to be very pretty.
One more thing for you. My back hurts a little bit this morning. I'm wondering if my cool down was thorough enough. But I'm also wondering, just in general, your warm up and your cool down, how much time should you devote to it, and what sorts of activities are you looking for in those spots, both before and after? Because you say, as you get older, or anyone, those are the areas in which you can really help prevent injury, which will ideally keep you on the field or the court or the ice, as it were.
Yeah, if you ever watch my gym routine, and some of this is not it's a expert opinion, if you will. But, if you talk to 10 different coaches, you might get 10 different answers on this matter. But,
Love it.
But one thing I think that we can really agree on is the importance of both, whether it's spending 5 to 10 minutes or whether it's spent 10 to 20 minutes. And sometimes I'll build in kind of a cool down set towards the end of my routine, which includes some things that I know that I need to work on as far as lack of strength in certain ways. And for me, mobility is also something that I really spend a lot of time on. And depending on the day, depending on how my body's feeling, I just listen to it. If I feel like I need 20 minutes as opposed to 10, I'll do that. But it really does depend on, kind of how I'm feeling. But at least for warm-up's sake, I do spend, roughly 10 to 20. And then the same thing for the cool down. Those are a good amount of minutes. I feel like that you can get your goal achieved and the object of why you're doing the warm-up and cool down achieved. And then again, if you're feeling a little bit more stiff or achy that day, that might be more time spent on a warm-up and then not as much time into your really intense portion until you really feel comfortable. That's the last thing you want to do is throw your body into something where you're not feeling quite right, especially if it's higher intensity for sports performance. So, that just kind of go with how your body feels for that day. But, a good warm-up or cool down, really consists of those type of things that we're talking about, mobility drills, maybe some corrective exercise or maybe more localized strengthening techniques that can really help hit some of those lack of strength areas. And then also adding in a cardio component is one thing that I will do maybe at the beginning or end. And, again, also depending on what I'm doing for the day. If I know I'm doing more high explosive things, I won't be doing a lot of cardio because the release of hormones from the endocrine system is going to be competing against each other. If I'm really trying to go hard with cardio and then I try to go really high weight, low rep intensity exercises or plyometrics, you're going to get a double dose of things and you might not get the best outcome from that either. So
okay. Well, I think I followed that advice. I think I followed that advice yesterday. I was thinking about going for a little bit of a run before hockey, and I thought, you know what? I'll just save it. I'll save it for the rink.
Yeah, and maybe in that case, it's adding a different kind of warm up or a lighter cardio, so you're not burning yourself out. You're not going into those.
So maybe a bike or something like that.
Sure, but lighter intensity, so that you don't push into getting that hormone release if you're going to be doing higher explosive stuff. So,
okay.
It again, depends on the goal, depends on the activity, which is a super gray area for the radio program here. But, it really is individual if you want to do yourself justice and do yourself right here. So.
Well, I think we have a good baseline for anyone out there who was listening and who was curious. Always consulting with a professional is nice, and luckily I have one in my Rolodex. His name is Mark Gike. He is a strength and conditioning specialist in addition to being a certified athletic trainer and a doctor of physical therapy. Mark, I have to go. I know you got to get to work too. So have fun today and have a great weekend. I'm sure you'll be active somewhere climbing a mountain or some sort of nonsense.
Yep, hitting out, going into the mountains again.
I'm very jealous, sir, but I'm sure I will see you soon, and I'm sure I'll be seeing all your activities on social media, as we always do.
I try to post at least a little bit for you.
Yeah, I'm very envious of all of that. That is Mark. I am Matt. When we return, I'll wrap up the show with our Ban the Cliche segment, and then we'll sign off and say goodbye for another week. This is Gike's Got Game on the River's Edge from Mr. Small's Theater. And we are back. Final segment. It'll be a quick one here on Gike's Got Game. We got started right around 10 o'clock. Fun to be with you a little bit further into the actual workday than I used to be. It gives me some time to think as well before I get into the studio. I think it leads to a better program. Today's radio costume, if you are watching the archive video, Instrument of a Crime catfish shirt I got in Nashville for $10 at the Predators team store. I figured I had to have something to remember the Stanley Cup final by, tangible, and something whimsical, as always. So I went with that. You might recall that Instrument of a Crime is how the catfish was referred to in the Pittsburgh police report when the gentleman from Nashville, the Predators fan, threw the catfish onto the ice at PPG Paints Arena during Game 1 of the Stanley Cup final. So that's the inside story there, if you needed that. And I feel like that's about as good of a thing as any that can help me remember what went on in June 2017 with a smile. Thanks again to Mark Gajtka, my brother, for joining me for some basic advice. Hope you were enriched by that segment. Some basic advice on how to get into competition, or if you're into competition as an amateur athlete, how to step it up a little bit. And as he said, everything is individualized and you have to know your own body and know how hard you can push it. I know that's tough for some people like myself, but you do gain that knowledge as you go along and as you compete more and more. And I can be as guilty as anyone as just going into the gym to work out and get a sweat going and not really focusing on certain things. So Mark always reminds me to try to hone my weaknesses and also make sure the strengths stay strengths. And that's always a key thing when it comes to training the body. Let's move into what you always look forward to, both the final number and Ban the Cliche. The final number is easy. That's 0, as in the number of points I have in 3 deck hockey games. Didn't realize how different deck hockey would be, which is running around with a stick in your hands, compared to roller hockey or ice hockey, which has the skating element. It's tough to, I think, stick handle and also run at the same time. Those are my excuses for not having contributed anything tangible to Team Atlas in the Penn Hills League. I appreciate Alan Saunders' patience for putting up with this newbie in this case. So 0, the final number for this week. And as for the cliche, I'm going to put on the ban list. I alluded to it earlier. Basement bloggers, or blogging from the basement, or just using the word blogger as a pejorative, as a put down in any way. It feels weird to have to say it, but the playing field is rather level these days, and it's been the case ever since the internet got started. We began to see the leveling of your traditional, old-school legacy media sources and the people online who were writing on their own and self-publishing. And as this new era continues on, we see a great leveling. And for better or worse, sometimes you'd rather not hear from certain people as much as you do on social media or online. But I think overall, it has helped to bring new ideas into the arena. And I mentioned my Jordan Staal story getting big clicks for DK Pittsburgh Sports. That's the type of thing that I could write, and I did write, without even leaving my house. Although that can be discouraging when outlets like ours spend so much time and money on travel and getting to places and giving you firsthand accounts. It doesn't make those kinds of speculative, big picture, analytical stories any less valid. Heck, I think the sports content market is enriched by having all of that, and I think that serves the fans in a greater way. And let the market decide, right? That's what capitalism is all about. That's what we're supposed to be about anyway. The customer isn't always right, But there's something to be said for giving the people what they want. And at this time of the year, like I said in the opening segment, what they frequently want is something you don't need a press pass to provide. Yes, that can help and it can give you credibility. But once you have that, feel free to stretch your legs, is how I feel. Go into why such and such a player could be a fit, why this situation is not desirable for a certain team, and why they should go about changing things. Advocacy is what I'm talking about. And you don't have to put aside your journalist hat or your impartial hat in order to dig into that sort of thing. I think it's still sort of a sore spot for many of us in the media establishment, if I am even in the media establishment, but I'll say that as I do have a press pass to Pirates, Penguins, and Steelers. If there even is, if I do look at work, I judge it on its quality, not on who created it, or whether it was created in someone's basement, or in someone's attic, or at a coffee shop, or whatever. It doesn't matter to me. If you're a blogger, whatever that means anymore these days, maybe social media and Twitter and Facebook have killed the blogger, but you still hear that being thrown out. Even if you spin off some of my original work and make it your own, for me, that's just like a rapper sampling a song and making it its own compelling bit of art. I don't have a problem with that, so I don't have a problem with that sort of thing when it comes to my business. If you wrote it from your house, and I don't know who you are, I don't know what you're all about, but it outperforms something I did from the press box, more power to you. If it is valid and if it is interesting and if it makes me think about something in a different way, I love it. I say bring it on, and that just means I have to get better to compete with you. So there are some bad aspects of the internet. We can all tend to live online more than we should, and it can detach us from real life, quote unquote. But I think there are many good things that have been brought about, and the democratization of media, and in particular, in my case, sports media, I believe is a good thing and will be a good thing when we look back on it in 30, 40, heck, 100 years from now. Thanks for listening and watching Gike's Got Game for this week. It has been my pleasure to broadcast from Mr. Small's Theater with help from Brian Crawford. Thank you again to Mark Gajtka for being my expert witness. This is Matt Gajtka, reminding you that when the radio fades, you know life's moving fast. I'll talk to you next week here on The River's Edge.